What does this make possible for you? What does that question have to do with you and your family in the season we're in, and why am I asking? Stay tuned. This is Motherhood Unmasked, the podcast for real talk about the challenges moms face. I'm your host, Vanessa Harris, but you are the hero. I'm grateful to connect with you today. It's so good to have you back for episode 6 because I am super excited about today's topic. You know, ever since this quarantine began, you and I focused on what we've lost, from loved ones to jobs to events to alone time to the illusion of control. And as someone who naturally sees the glass half empty, it's easy for me to camp out there. But these last couple of months have been different. I heard Pat Flynn ask, "What does this make possible for you?" during his YouTube Live I discovered in my feed several weeks ago. Now, I'd heard of him before and knew him to be a podcaster, but now that the Lord told me it was time for me to podcast, I decided to watch, hoping for some tips. He was in the middle of sharing his experience losing his architect job back in 2009 during that economic downturn. After feeling sorry for himself and asking the usual "why me," he flipped it and wondered what getting fired made possible for him. And for him, it made becoming an entrepreneur possible, a path he'd never have considered if not forced. And having been forced into quarantine, his glass half full perspective resonated with me because it explained why I didn't have a fit about my kids having to learn at home temporarily. Yes, we'd homeschooled in the past, so I had a frame of reference, but more than that, having them home made a tighter knit family unit possible. And that's something I appreciate with my children more now than when I formally homeschooled them 5 years ago. This quarantine also made it possible for my children to get a break from toxic dynamics at their schools. Because while we laugh at that social media post with the sign on the side of the car saying, "You lied, my kids are not a joy to have in class," it's not funny when you were the child in class with those kids. So hopefully this time away makes it possible for you and I to teach our children common decency, kindness, and empathy too. Here's what else. This stuck at home life made starting a business course online with my kids possible. Now, don't give me that tone of face. I know adding more school to crisis schooling sounds ridiculous, but go with me for a moment. As a service to everyone during this quarantine, Pat's made several of his paid courses free of charge, as people are finding themselves in the same predicament he did back in 2009. So I decided to make this quarantine work for us. And for us, taking his business course for free worked. Because one of the things this experience taught me is the importance of flexibility and adaptability. So while I expect my kids will obtain college degrees in their fields of interest, I'm also exposing them to best practices for starting a successful business, because you never know how you'll have to pivot in life, and previous exposure is priceless. So, while they have this time, why not encourage them to dream a little, come up with a business concept, and test it out? Now, I'm not saying you should put your kids in a business course during this quarantine. I'm not saying you have to do anything. Keeping your child fed and learning the rest of the school year might be all you can handle, and that's perfectly fine. Because motherhood is not a competition. We all have our own race to run. But if your kids are laying around half the day, eating you out of house and home, scrolling on devices, consider what all that free time makes possible for them that's productive. What could you expose them to? What creative sparks could you fan into a flame just by setting a few boundaries? And by that I mean, what if you limited the time your kids spend on Snap or gaming? How might they end up using that free time instead? Because I'm going to tell you, when options get limited, kids get creative. I about fell out the other day when my oldest stopped me in the kitchen to say he appreciates me limiting his phone time. He literally said he wouldn't have rediscovered his passion for drumming and music production if I hadn't. I looked up to see if Jesus was coming when he said it, because a teen telling you a boundary was a good idea, That's the Lord. And it's been awesome to see my kids explore creativity along with working on assignments from this business course. And yes, my children have fun. The fellas play video games and work on their basketball drills. My daughter plays dolls, writes songs, and watches her favorite shows. And they all do workouts, and sometimes they just lay around and chill. But their days are as well-rounded as I can make them. And the benefit of that is I avoid the "I'm bored" whine, because they know that if I hear that, I'll find them something to do, and they don't want that. And by the way, what does this quarantine make possible for you? Are there books you've been meaning to read or ones you've been meaning to write? Is there a hobby you'd love to start or develop? What insight or tools can you acquire that make your life and relationships with others richer? The quarantine made this podcast possible for us to come together. The trauma of getting thrust into new roles with everyone at home and knowing us mamas would carry most of the burden made the need for a space for us to recharge and regroup more urgent than ever. So I'm not suggesting being busy just to be busy. I'm talking about being intentional. You know best what this season makes possible for you and your family. So I encourage you to do what works for your crew and nothing more. But you know what I do know? Coronavirus took too much from you and me. Don't let it take opportunity too. I'm looking for my family to come out of this better, not bitter. And I'm praying the same for you and yours. All right, soapbox over. But if you're interested in the Start a Business from Scratch course or any other free stuff Pat's offering as long as this quarantine lasts, you can find the link to them in the resource section over at vinelifefaith.com/resources. That's vinelifefaith.com/resources. There, in addition to the link to Pat's website, is a link to licensed therapist Catherine Barner's book, God Help Me, I'm Grieving, along with my printable resource, 10 Power Pearls of Wisdom for Moms. So yeah, the coronavirus pandemic and this quarantine are a 1-2 punch for sure. But it's up to you how you hit back. So until next time, remember, when it comes to you being the mother of your children, you are the woman for the job. Take care. Thanks for making this podcast part of your day today. Before you go, please be sure to rate and subscribe to the podcast. That way you get notified about new episodes while helping other moms discover the show. Motherhood Unmasked is sponsored by Vine Life Faith, where we're breaking negative cycles and building healthy community through connection with Christ. VineLifeFaith.com.